Good morning. I'm going to call to order this regular morning of the Zoning and Planning Committee for Thursday, July 12th. My name is Jeremy Schrader, and I'm the chair of this committee. With me at the dais are Councilmember Reich, Councilmember Goodman, and Councilmember Gordon. Let the record reflect that we have a quorum, and we have 7 items on today's agenda. Item 1 through 6 comprise our consent agenda, and I'll go over those first. First is the referring of staff of the subject matter of an ordinance amending Title 20, Chapter 525 of the Minneapolis Code of Ordinances, amending provisions related to qualifications for applying for, obtaining, or maintaining a permit or license. Number 2 is amending an alley vacation resolution from 2017 by updating the legal description of the vacation, which is adjacent to 2900 Pleasant Avenue. Number 3 is approving an application submitted by Bradley Rackett for rezoning the property located at 1901 Grand Street Northeast to add an industrial living overlay district to allow for a reception hall. Number 4 is the approving of an application submitted by Reuter Walton Development to rezone the property located at 2510 Riverside Avenue, 2506 Riverside Avenue, and 2514 8th Street South from a C1 neighborhood commercial district to an OR3 institutional office residential district to construct a new 6-story 85-unit residential building. Number 5 is the approving an application submitted by Jake Groth to rezone the property located at 4600 36th Avenue South from an R1A single-family district to an R2B two-family district, retaining the airport overlay district and the shoreline overlay district to allow for a new duplex. And number 6 is the approving of an application submitted by Opus Development to rezone land at 730 and 730 and a half First Street North that is currently zoned for light industrial district, and a land at 800 First Street North that is currently zoned C3A Community Shopping District Centers District to an R6 multifamily district, retaining all existing overlay districts to allow for the construction of a 6-story, 225-unit apartment building. Is there any discussion on any of these items, or would any of my colleagues like to pull any of these items off? All right, seeing no action, with that I move items 1 through 6. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say no. The ayes have it, and the motion carries. Finally, number 7 is an overview of the Minneapolis 2040, the draft update to the city's comprehensive plan. We'll begin with a staff presentation.
Good morning, Chair Schrader, council members. This morning I would like to give you yet another spiel about the comp plan. You've probably heard me say this now 3 times this week. But I would like to just start by kind of explaining the process that we utilized to create the draft comp plan, which is out for 100 days of public comment currently. And we had about 150 staff from around the enterprise participate in research committees over the past 2 years to formulate the outlines and research and data collection for this document. The draft has a small number of what we would term land use policies, which are formal policies that will guide land use and zoning into the future 10 years of the city that can become regulatory per statute in the comprehensive plan statute. But there are a much longer list of policy statements that relate to these land use policies. And so this morning, we would like to highlight some of the land use policies and some of the other policy statements that are interconnected with these policies themselves. So I'm going to ask Paul Mogish to come up, and then I'm going to join you back at the dais or back here at the podium when he's done. Thank you.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, council members. My name is Paul Mogish. I'm a planner in the Long Range Planning Division of CPED. I'd like to add a little bit this time around to what Heather just said about the process that got us here, and back up just a little bit. You all know this, but for everyone else watching, I want to make sure that we remind folks that the process that led to the development of this draft plan goes back a couple of years, and we started by listening to the people of Minneapolis about their values and aspirations for the future of the city. We then translated those values and aspirations that we heard into long-term goals for the city and the comprehensive plan. As you know, there are 14 of those goals in the draft plan that were approved last year by the previous city council. And then the next step was to propose policies and draft actions that are intended to achieve those goals. So as Heather mentioned, there's a small number of land use policies that are at the core of the plan. That small number is 4. And they lay out how the physical arrangement of buildings in our city can be used as a tool to achieve the plan goals. These are the 4: access to housing, access to employment, production and processing, and access to commercial goods and services. And together, those 4 policies guide how the draft maps shaped up, and we'll talk more about that in a moment. I'll run through each of the 4 briefly. The first is access to housing. The access to housing policy is about increasing both the supply of housing in a growing city and increasing the diversity of housing types to meet the changing needs of individual households. For the past 20 years or so, the primary means for growing the housing supply in our city has been to allow multifamily housing along public transit routes, as you see in that first graphic. This draft plan carries that principle forward. What's new in this draft plan is proposing to allow not just a greater supply of housing, but greater diversity in the types of housing that we see built in Minneapolis. Broadly speaking, the plan proposes to do this in 2 ways. First, we have neighborhoods that are closest to downtown in that second graphic there. That's just an illustration of the concept. Closest to downtown that today contain a wide range of housing types, from single-family homes to apartment buildings and everything in between, townhouses, etc. But in many cases, new development within that existing range is no longer allowed. This draft plan proposes to once again allow that existing mix to be built. Second, we have neighborhoods farthest from downtown, illustrated in that third graphic there, that were largely not built with a diversity of housing types. They were built primarily as single-family homes. We have neighborhoods in those areas farthest from downtown that are almost entirely single-family homes, in some cases around 70% or even more. So this draft plan proposes allowing more housing diversity in those areas by allowing additional units on traditional size city lots.
But excuse me one quick second.
Absolutely.
First, like the record to reflect that we've been joined by Councilmember Ellison and Council President Bender. And also a lot of this, because we're all on the Housing Committee, if there's a way we could specify on the zoning, that would really be appreciated.
I'm sorry, Mr. Chair.
If we could focus really, we can go briefly through this, but direct people to, if they would like more on some of these other housing principles. We covered a lot of it yesterday. They're free to go online and see that there. So if there are some zoning things you wanted to go specifically, and I think that'd be most helpful for this committee.
Sure, Mr. Chair, council members, I'll move on quickly from this.
And one other quick, and from the transportation chair, if there's other transportation parts, to move that to that committee.
Sure.
And thank you for much for that.
Yep. So as the chair just mentioned, these housing principles, these guidelines are just that. They on their own do not achieve all the housing goals. And as the chair mentioned yesterday in the Housing Committee, we had a discussion about the housing policies that are proposed in the plan to couple the land use policies. On the issue of employment, we know that we're going to be gaining around 33,000 jobs between now and 2040 in the city. The land use principles are pretty simple when it comes to employment. We need to make sure we have room for it. And there are 2 primary ways to do that. One is to develop minimum development densities for downtown to make sure that we're best utilizing the land in downtown and reinforce downtown as the center of the regional economy. And to continue to guide new office and institutional uses to locations well served by public transportation throughout the city. And as is the case with all topics in land use, it's not enough just to guide and to regulate. We also need proactive action. So there's a whole suite of draft policies in the plan related to economic development, economic competitiveness. As an example, we need to promote and support business creation, innovation, entrepreneurship, and expansion. Also related to employment is the issue of production and processing. The plan proposes to continue, as we do today in the current comprehensive plan, to set aside areas for production and processing uses, formerly called industrial, that have minimal or no air, water, or noise pollution impacts, and that provide quality living wage jobs. And once again, we need to couple this with proactive action. For example, focusing business assistance for targeted industries in low-impact industrial activities that offer new opportunities for historically unemployed and underemployed residents. Commercial goods and services. This is something that's a little bit new as well in this draft comprehensive plan. Something that we know is that when we look at the issue of climate change and reducing our greenhouse gas emissions, 45% of trips that people take by any mode nationally are for shopping and errands and such, while only 15 or 20% are for trips to work. So there's something that the land use guidance can do to help that out. And that's to make sure that we have opportunities for people to meet their daily needs closer to where they live. So there's kind of three main strategies for this. One is allow commercial uses where they currently exist throughout the city. That may seem obvious, but in a lot of cases, we actually have commercial buildings and commercial uses today that are not allowed by the zoning. Second is to designate additional areas, so expand the areas where commercial uses are allowed in parts of the city where demand for retail goods and services exceeds the supply and that are well served by public transportation. We know that people, based on some research that we've done, we know that people in Minneapolis are spending a lot of their retail dollars outside the city limits, so there's an opportunity to capture more of that inside Minneapolis. And then finally, require retail to be incorporated into new buildings in select areas of the city with the highest residential densities, highest pedestrian traffic, and the most frequent transit service, so that if and when redevelopment happens in those places, that we don't lose those opportunities for providing those services to neighborhood residents. And of course, once again, policy or guidance and regulation isn't enough. We need to take proactive action. For example, reinvesting in existing commercial building stock to retain its viability and contribute to a high quality and distinctive physical environment. So these are the four policies.
If I can interrupt you for 1
Yes.
second, we have a question from the council president.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Mogush, I just wanted to go back to the last slide and ask a quick question about commercial uses. So I know in my ward and probably likely across the city, there are buildings that were historically used for commercial uses, small grocery stores or corner shops that aren't on the corridors that are indicated here. I just wondered if this plan is helping us move in a direction of kind of re-embracing those uses in the interior of neighborhoods where, again, they were traditionally found and have been made illegal over time through the zoning code and the land use guidance.
Mr. Chair, Council President Bender, so the question is that the intent?
I wondered if you could clarify. So the map shows a lot of the corridors, and it doesn't really show commercial uses in the interior of neighborhoods where there were, at least in my ward, there were a lot, 100 years ago or 50 years ago. And I just wondered if the land use guidance addresses those smaller scale commercial uses off of the main corridors.
Chair Schrader, Council President Bender, thank you for that clarification. Yes, indeed it does. In fact, if you go to the actual interactive map on the website, the future land use map, and zoom in to see it up close to properties, you'll see that there are red commercial properties scattered throughout in places where they currently exist. And that is the intent, is to kind of validate those and allow them to continue. In looking at some of the public comments that we've been receiving, we've noticed some folks identifying ones that we missed. So we encourage people to keep doing that. Something else that's new in this draft plan is a modified approach from the past in terms of the tool that's used to guide future land use. According to the principles that we just discussed. The draft plan has two companion maps. The first is the future land use map, which guides land use, as the title suggests. And the second works in tandem with the future land use map, and that is the built form map. It's separate from the question of use. It doesn't guide where residential should be, where production should be, where commercial should be, et cetera. It's about the types of buildings and the scale of buildings. And so to get the full picture of the draft guidance for a particular parcel or area, one needs to look at both of those together. And this is what, as a guidance tool, sets us up as a city for the important follow-up work starting next year to take a look at the zoning code and zoning map and update it to be consistent with the plan that is adopted. With that, I'll turn it over to Heather to close this out.
Thanks, Paul. I just wanted to mention small area plans. I think this has come up on a number of occasions as we've talked with neighborhood groups in particular. Neighborhood groups in Minneapolis put an incredible amount of work and effort into producing small area plans, and they're often extremely valuable documents for the city. And you as a city council are asked to adopt these documents, but sometimes they come into conflict with the comprehensive plan and create a situation where we are then being asked to do conditional use permits and variances. And so we'd like to have a small area plan process. As we bring the finalized draft to you, we'd like to recommend a process that would help to clarify the role of small area plans and our role as planners in the creation of those small area plans, and then validate them in terms of the comprehensive plan. So that's something I just wanted to mention to you, and we've put some specific guidance into this draft document that you can read here. But we want to try and retain that future land use built form guidance that neighborhoods are giving us, the urban design policies that they're sharing with us in terms of their needs aesthetically for development, and thinking about how we use that information and crosswalk it with our capital improvements budget, and so that we're actually taking a more consolidated investment strategy approach with small area plans and with investments in the city, and then continue to look at the community development information that these neighborhoods are giving us about their needs for goods and services and specific development. So just wanted to mention that, something we're thinking about. We'd appreciate hearing any thoughts that you may have about small area plans and that process as well. Important that we're part of that discussion.
Oh, and thanks. I have a quick question from Councilmember Gooden.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Worthington, I'm also confused about what this comp plan's attitude is towards small area plans. I think it's really important that it get clarified. I was at Bryn Mawr last night where people were very upset that their small area plan wasn't included. When they mentioned it to planners, the planners said they didn't know there was one, but now that they do, they'll put it in. So how that could happen, I don't know. I can understand in a neighborhood where a small area plan is 10 years old, you might be questioning, although I wouldn't, because I don't think 10 years in the life of a city is a long amount of time. But in areas where the plan was adopted only 2 or 3 years ago, like in Loring Park, our planners were actively involved in that small area plan, and we did walk them back from some of the things that we felt were inconsistent with what the overall city policy is. But now it seems like the Loring Park small area plan, for example, has been completely ignored in this. And that's why I'm getting angry emails from people in Loring Park who worked on the small area plan not 2 years ago, asking why after the big fight happened over rezoning, and they did a rezoning to follow it, that now we're essentially suggesting upzoning all of this area too that was not suggested in their small area plan. So it's not fair to say your small area plan's inconsistent with what we want or what we're putting into the new comp plan, because of course these plans could be different. So tell me give me some advice on how I should be talking about this, because I honor the work of these neighborhoods, a lot of which we've paid for and we've encouraged and we've adopted.
As do we. So let me clarify, when I say inconsistent with the comprehensive plan, I'm speaking about the past. So there have been some small area plans that have been adopted that are in conflict with the current comprehensive plan, not this draft plan. So that's what I was referring to.
Thank you.
The process that you've utilized as a city is that you typically adopt those small area plans at the city council level, and that formalizes them. And then that sometimes leads to rezoning But it basically memorializes the direction that you as a city council are giving us as staff. In some cases, they have not been adopted by the city council, and those plans may have not been reflected in the comprehensive plan draft, but there is a list on the website that shows every single small area plan that's been adopted by the city council, and then how we have treated that document in terms of our planning going forward. And so I think that might be helpful to take a look at. Paul can give you some more additional information on Bryn Mawr.
I just
Okay.
want to talk a little bit about that list that Heather mentioned, which is, and I did speak with the Bryn Mawr folks a couple of weeks ago about this. There is that list lays out, it describes for folks what elements of each of the small area plans was carried forward to the land use and built form maps. We as staff inadvertently left the Bryn Mawr plan out of that list. That was simply an error on our part, and we certainly apologize for it. We'll be adding it back in. It's a little more tricky with that plan. It doesn't actually have a future land use map in it, but it does do an excellent job of describing the development opportunities available throughout the Bryn Mawr neighborhood, along with plenty of guidance about that. So we'll rectify that error.
Okay, and Mr. Chair? Okay, thank you. It might make sense then, at least for me, and everyone can speak for themselves, if we could have a meeting just on that topic of how the small area plans conform or not. I mean, in my ward, there's probably only a small handful to begin with, but I'm very conscious of stepping on the toes of people who have done this work. And if Beth Elliott was here, she would tell you, I mean, she pushed them back quite a bit on some of the things that happened. So the small area plan and the rezoning was a compromise. And for us now to
For Loring, you're speaking.
for
about,
Loring.
sorry.
So for us
Thank you.
then to say, well, none of that work is good and we're going to just do exactly what we want like we tried to do 2 years ago, I don't think that's going to fly with folks.
May I suggest that we start by looking at that list, and we carefully went back and crosswalked any recommendation that we made about a deviation from that small area plan, any small area plan. We documented that. So that might be a good place to start, and then we could have a conversation about the why we're recommending a deviation from it. So that could be a place to start. We'd be happy to do that either individually or as a group.
Well,
think
I
that
would
be a place
appreciate to
start.
have that meeting individually. And then I guess since
Great.
we're saying we're taking public comment, we're making changes based on what we hear, I would assume then that there would be an opportunity, although you've described the why, to go back to what the plan was, should there be a lot of comment about that, which as I understand it, there is.
We absolutely would. We'd be
Great.
happy to have that conversation.
And I would happily meet with you guys to discuss
Great.
the few in my ward.
We'll get that on the calendar. Thanks. And I just close out by, again, reminding you of the process details as we come to the end of the comment period, which is July 22nd, so it's next week. In late September, we'll issue a finalized draft, and there will be additional opportunity for comment and review at that time. And then in late October, the public hearing has been scheduled for the Planning Commission, but there was some discussion yesterday about an additional public hearing, so we await your direction on that. And then in December, we will bring it to you for action.
Great. We have a question from the council president.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I just had a quick comment about the small area plan piece, because I think I think the way that the small area plans have been developed and adopted across the city over the past 20 years or so is not totally consistent. And in my ward, it's a place that's kind of rapidly changing.
Right.
And we have small area plans for some major intersections and commercial corridors where there's development pressure and not for others. And some of the plans are more open to interpretation than others. And so I think the approach that the land use section of this comprehensive plan is taking is going to force us as policymakers to provide more direction in the comprehensive plan. And I think that's probably a good thing. It is in my word, because otherwise we end up with a lot of frustrated constituents who are reading different interpretations of the same document over and over and over again every time a development is proposed. And that may be unique to my ward where there hasn't been consistent representation on the city council for so long. And I think in the wards where there has, that's probably less of an issue. So I'm looking forward to having more consistency across the board in terms of how detailed the guidance is. If you look into Whittier, where there's a lot of new development pressure coming, there is no small area plan for that whole neighborhood, where I have plans for other intersections that are really similar. And so it was just a kind of little different perspective where I think some of the neighborhoods that have been really involved and where the council member has been there for a long time, there probably is a lot more detail that is, you know, clear to more people in the community, whereas in other places is not so much the case.
We all thank you, Council Member or Council President and Chair Schroeder. I think the other issue here is that it sometimes we are not at the table for those conversations. So neighborhoods develop small area plans in there, and not with our partnership. And I want to stress that word. It's not about us telling them what to do, but we'd like to be their partners in that effort and make sure that we're providing context for these plans. I've talked to a couple of council members who've noted that there are some plans in their area where the plan stops on a street and doesn't continue, and the street continues for several more miles, and there's no expectation of a corridor strategy. And I think that's a good, that's a really good example of some of the challenges around the process right now. So we would like to find a better process for the neighborhoods and a process that really stresses that partnership with the city. So that would be my request.
Oh, thanks. Councilmember Gordon?
Thank you. I appreciate the discussion. I also appreciate a little bit of the focusing on the small area plans. That definitely comes up. This might actually be an opportunity for us to clearly define that future small area plans will be possible. Here's some criteria, here's some restrictions, here's how we're going to manage them in the future, because I think that will show people there's a pathway out to have their particular area addressed. In my area, there's several of those, and there's station area plans, and we also have overlay districts, and those are considered very valuable and very important. We went to a lot of trouble and effort working even with the state legislature to back us up on creating this university area overlay district. We haven't necessarily done a lot with it, but it would be nice if those would be acknowledged in the comp plan, that we know those exist. We're not erasing our history. We'll carry things forward and maybe talk more about what it would mean to be a pedestrian overlay district, for example. And there might be some automatic stuff that and there is already, but the comp plan could help us review that a little bit. Which also reminded me of the innovation district. So in 2015, I worked really hard, I don't know if I worked really hard, but I authored a resolution to create an innovation district, and the last resolve clause of that resolution was, we'll finish this work, because we were kind of working as we go. I mean, it's pretty clear. It's got some definite specifics about how large it has to be. There has to be some partnerships involved. Its purpose has to do with economic development. But then it says at the end, we will develop a definition of innovation districts to include in the city's comprehensive plan update. So I just wanted to remind us of that. It's not in there yet, but let's get it in there for the next draft and somehow talk about what that is, or how we're going to develop the definition and more of what it means. I think it can be a great tool.
Thank you, Councilmember. We'll do that.
All right. Appreciate it. I think that's all I wanted to say.
Thank you. Not seeing any other questions for staff. I'm going to give you a second to think that over. All right. Well, in that case, I'm going to make a motion to receive and file this update. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say no. The ayes have it, and that motion carries.
May I beg
Finally,
your indulgence on one item?
I was going to call on that, so please go ahead.
I know you were going to gavel the meeting closed. Today is Brian Schaefer's last day with us. He is going to work for the Minneapolis Public Housing Authority as their Assistant Director of Real Estate Development. We're very proud of him. We hate to lose him. He's been with the city for 13 years, and he is a resident of the city and a very dedicated public servant, and I would like to thank him for his service. And you'll note that we're all wearing checked shirts for him today. I see some of you got the memo as well. So thank you very much for that indulgence, and thank you, Brian.
Why, on behalf of myself and others on the committee, just thank Brian for his service to and continued service to the city, and we look forward to working with you in your new capacity. All right, I'll gavel us out. So think we are now adjourned. Thank you. See you again.